Hello, dear saints, and welcome to Grace Thoughts with Chio. Today, we are coming to you from a very different location, as you can see from the background. But that won't stop us from bringing Grace Thoughts to you. So I hope you get something. I hope there are not so many interferences because I have little control over this environment. Today we're going to be talking about something I've seen a lot of people use, a lot of preachers, a lot of pastors, a lot of Christians use to frighten one another. It's like a business. A lot of people want to just frighten other people. And so today we'll be talking about that. And it is this idea of judgment beginning at the household of God, or judgment beginning in the household of God. I'm sure you've had it. People threaten you and they say stuff like, judgment begins at the household of God, so we have to be very careful. Those who are just or those who are righteous or the believers will have a very strict judgment, or have a stricter judgment than the others. So it's important for us to understand what this actually means and to read it in context. The verse we are going to be talking about today is 1 Peter chapter 4 verse 17. I'm going to read it for you, and then maybe when you hear it you recognize how you must have heard it being used in a Christian assembly, preaching online, on TV, and so on and so forth. So let's read what is in 1 Peter chapter 4 verse 17. It says, "For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God?" Now, how do a lot of people interpret this? This is the way they read it literally. They say, "For it is time for God to begin to judge those who are of his household. And the standard that he is going to use to judge us is going to be so terrible because he has a higher expectation of us. To whom much is given, much is expected." So since God has given us a lot, God expects a lot from us. Sounds right? Makes sense? Absolutely. It does sound like it makes absolute sense. But does it? Now, what does it mean, this judgment? One of the things that you will hear many times as a response or a reaction to the grace message, the gospel, is this judgment thing. A lot of people send me messages and they say, "What about this verse and that verse and that verse?" And almost all the verses they ask me about have to do with judgment. So there's this fear of judgment that either in this world or on the last day, God is going to judge us and is going to check the list and see whether we did well. Check. There's a checklist that God has for believers, and the one for believers, according to many of these Christians, is longer than the checklist that they have for those who are not believers. Well, let's read this in context. And if we look at this in context, it's very important to look at what comes before and what comes after, as I've shared with you many times. And what comes before? Verse 16, it says, "Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name." Then look at verse 19. Verse 19 says, "Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good." So if you look at the context, you discover it's talking about suffering as a Christian. Suffering as a Christian, that's the whole context. So this judgment is actually talking about persecution. It's talking about persecution. The word judgment is used in different ways, many different ways in the Bible. And that's why sometimes we go into the Greek meaning and we unpack it, because the word judgment doesn't always mean judgment the way many of us understand judgment. This judgment is persecution. When you are a Christian, at this time when this was written, the Christians were suffering. In fact, most of the first letter of St. Peter was written to Christians who were suffering. And he's saying the suffering, the persecution that is being unleashed by the Jewish religious leaders, also by the Romans who had the empire at that time. He's saying they are now beginning to persecute the church of God. That is the household of God that he's talking about. So he's simply talking about persecution starting at the household of God. And then he's saying, even in this persecution, it's not only those who are in the household of God who will experience persecution, others as well. But the way they will experience it is worse. That's what actually he's saying. It's worse because for us, when we are persecuted as Christians, we can fall back on God. We can get encouragement from God. We can pray, and many times even we are delivered from persecution, like Paul and Silas were delivered. But he's saying, what about the others? That's the second part. He says, if judgment begins at the house of God, if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? Can you imagine? We have all these things that God has put in place to help us manage persecution and even be victorious in persecution. But they don't. The others do not have all these things. So he's saying they will have a worse deal because they don't have prayer, they don't have the Holy Spirit, they don't have encouragement from their brothers and sisters, they don't have the tools that we have to manage persecution. So it's like, for them it's worse. They're going to experience it in a very terrible way that they wouldn't even have comfort from the Holy Spirit in the midst of their persecution, because they do not obey the gospel of God. So that's what he's saying. He's basically saying we have an advantage. He's not talking about God judging us. God is our Father. A father does not judge his children. So he's not talking about God judging us, and he's not talking about God judging other people. He's simply talking about the persecution. That's what he calls the judgment. I hope this blesses you and this helps you to understand the Bible even better and renew your mind. You are blessed.
West gives the license to proclaim his mercy to the whole world.